There's a yarn for every pattern and a pattern for every yarn. Let's talk about it. Hi, it's Sonia here of The Pretty Stitch with today's episode of Yarn Matters. So today we're going to be talking about yarn and pattern choice. And you might be wondering, why is that important? Well, it's not super important, but when you're making a particular pattern, you want to make sure you choose the right yarn, or if you buy a certain yarn, you want to make sure you choose the right pattern when you are making your project. So what do I mean by that? So for instance, let's say you want to knit a project with cables on it, or crochet a project with cables, and you decide to use this multicolored yarn. Well, that might not necessarily be a good choice, and the reason why is this. So I did that, or I tried that. So I had attempted to make a sweater for one of my nephews, and I found this really cute sweater pattern with cables on it, and I thought, oh, this green yarn is really pretty, and this is gonna look super adorable. Well, the project ended up getting frogged, and the reason why is you can't see the cables. So there are actually cables right here in the center. Can you see them? No, not really. And the reason why is because I chose poorly with my yarn when knitting this particular project. I frogged this project and knitted something else that was more appropriate with the yarn. So you want to make sure when you're choosing your yarn, depending what you're making, that you choose the correct yarn. Now, of course, you can use whatever yarn you want when you're making a project, but if you really want your cables to stand out, I do not suggest using multicolored yarn like this. So what I do suggest is, so here I have, this is a store-bought sweater, but as you can clearly see, there are cables that were knitted. It was probably machine knitted on here, but there are cables on this sweater, and you can see the cables because the particular yarn that they chose to make this sweater is a solid colored yarn, and it's not too dark either. So you have to keep in mind when you are making a particular project that you want to understand what your focus is. So if you want your focus to be the cables in this instance here, then you want to make sure that your yarn is more in the background, where if you're choosing something else where you want the yarn to stand out, then the yarn is the star. So in this case, we want the cables to be the star. So in this sample here, obviously the cables are not the star of the show. The yarn is the star of the show here. Now, that's not to say that you can't use multicolored yarn with cables. You can, but the rule of thumb is make sure that the color runs are longer so that then the cables will stand out. So you might be wondering, what do you mean by longer color runs? So here I have a cowl that I made. Now, I did not use, these are not cables, but it's definitely a textured stitch pattern that I crocheted. And obviously you can see that it's a multicolored yarn, but you can still see the textured stitch. It doesn't get lost in all the colors because the colors are longer. So here we go. We have like long strips of this purple, and then long strips of this blue here, and the gray. So the stitch can pop out a little bit more. But when you see this project here, these are very short color runs of dark green and light green and like a white. And so obviously the cables have gotten completely lost in this pattern here. So here I have an example of a crocheted cabled project. So this is a cowl that I made, and as you can see, I used a solid light colored yarn. And that's another thing I suggest is when you, especially making cables or any type of textured stitch, if you really want the stitch to pop, then choose obviously a solid colored yarn like I have here, and a more of a lighter colored yarn. I mean, you can certainly use a darker yarn if you want to, but if it's really dark, let's say a black or a really dark navy or even a super dark green, your cables might not show up as well. And if that's okay, if that's what you're going for, if you want a more like muted effect with the cables, then that might be a great choice. But if you really want to see your cables, you know, popping out, then I do suggest a lighter yarn. And all of the patterns that I've shown, if I do have a pattern for them, I will put the link in the description box. I do have a pattern for this guy here. This is a cow. And for this one, I like cows. I did a cow series, so a lot of these are from that. This is one. This is one of my favorite cows here. I wear this one an awful lot. So you can just check out those links if you're interested. And some of them are videos, and some of them are videos and written patterns as well. So here's another example of some yarn. This is a solid colored yarn. This is a balaclava that I made. I do have a video for this. And I wanted this stitch to be more of the star. It's more of a textured stitch. So I wanted to make sure that when I made this guy, that the stitches, you know, that you could see the fun textures here. So you might be thinking, well, she must really dislike multicolored yarn, and that is not true. I love to work with different colors, but I do know for myself and for some people, I mean, I'm wearing a multicolored. This is a cow that I made. And I wanted this yarn to be more of the star. So this is a Tunisian cow. I do have a pattern for this guy, but I chose a stitch that, you know, is more of a simple stitch. It does look really pretty in a lighter color too. It's a honeycomb stitch. It's one of my favorite Tunisian stitches, but it also works really well with this multicolored yarn, and they're not really competing with each other because I did want all these fun colors to be more of the star with this project. But with this particular stitch, it does look really beautiful in a solid color as well. So, you know, it just depends on what you're making. But back to, you know, me disliking multicolored yarn, definitely not the case. But I do know for some people, I do belong to some Facebook groups, and I've seen on Instagram where people, you know, post their projects. And sometimes they're very unhappy with how their projects turned out. And I think the reason is it's nothing to do with the pattern itself or their skill level. You know, their work was good. It came down to yarn choice. And the particular pattern that they made, they just didn't pair that well together. And sometimes people get really overwhelmed with a lot of colors. So let's say, you know, you have yarn like this and you make a big blanket out of it. I mean, that can be a lot on the senses, on the eyes. And for some people, you know, they just be like, oh, that's just too much. So something that you can do is you could break this up a little bit. So I'm going to show you a project that I made a couple years ago. These are socks, and I had this yarn in my stash that in the skein, it really looked like Halloween barf is all I can say. It was like you took all the Halloween colors and you just threw them in that skein. You know, they just threw up all over the skein of Halloween colors, and it wasn't cute. It was pretty ugly actually. But I, you know, was doing a bust my stash. I was trying to go through my stash, and I just thought of that yarn as a challenge to myself. Like, how can I make this kind of look nice? So I made these socks, and what I did was I paired the socks with a solid color and made stripes. So you can see in the picture that I have the dark green, and then I have the Halloween colored yarn, and I made stripes, and I think they turned out really, really cute. I was really happy with how the socks turned out, but I think if I would have made them all in that multicolored Halloween barf yarn, I would have hated them. So that's a little trick that you could do to break up, you know, yarn that is like a lot. Like, you love the colors in the skein, but you're just like, I don't know if I could, you know, have a whole project in, you know, that color. So stripes are a great way of breaking up that yarn. You know, either pick a color that's similar to that's in that multicolored skein, or a color that's a fun contrast. It doesn't necessarily have to match, but if it's a neat contrast, that can look really nice as well. And also, when you're working certain projects, you know, keep in mind, as I said before, of the stitch pattern, if you really want the stitch pattern to pop. So here we go. is another example of another cow, another favorite of mine. And this is a really fun pattern, and I absolutely love how this one turned out with the contrasting colors. It's a pretty simple pattern, but pairing it with the blue and the pink really highlights, you know, the fun stitch pattern of this cowl. I mean, you certainly could make this all in one color, but I think it would be less of an impact. You know, and that depends if you know, if this is too much, if you don't like the stripes, that's fine, and you might prefer something that's all one color. But I really think that having the two colors in this particular cowl really enhances the pattern. So that's just something, you know, just to keep in mind when you either see a pattern or you have some yarn, you know, to just think a little bit about how you want that finished object to look. So here is another example, yet another cowl of, I made stripes here, and I love this color combination. This might be a lot for some people, but I love blue and green together for some reason. I just think blue and green together look so pretty. Some people might not like it, that's okay. But again, this is a nice textured stitch, and I feel like having these stripes on here really helps to highlight the stitch. But then on the other hand, I have this scarf that I made, and it's actually the same stitch pattern. It's a scarf, and I do have patterns for these guys if you're interested. And I was going for more of a gradient effect of how I did this pattern. So you can still see the stitch pattern, but it's not as in your face as the green and blue one. But that's what I was going for. I really wanted more of the gradient effect and kind of the stitch to be in the background a little bit. And you know, I'm really happy with how this guy turned out. So, you know, just keep in mind of, like I said before, you know, think about how you kind of want your project to look when it's finished, when you're choosing your yarn or a particular pattern. So let's go back to multicolored yarn. You know, I do love multicolored yarn. So sometimes with multicolored yarn, if you do want to make something that is all in multicolored yarn, I feel that if the simpler the stitch, the better it looks. So as I say, think about, again, how you want your finished object to look and what you want your focus to be. So if you want the yarn to be the star of the show, pick a more simple stitch when you're using multicolored yarn. So here I have this rainbow cowl that I made, and I don't have a pattern for this, I just made it for fun. But I wanted, when I was making, yeah, I can't feel like it's sliding out of my hands. So when I was making this, I wanted the focus to be the yarn. I really wanted the yarn to stand out and not be competing with a stitch. So I just used, I'm pretty sure, just a single crochet in the back loops for the entire project. And this is a fun cowl to wear. It's, makes me happy when it's, those yucky, dreary winter days, because I hate winter. But, I really wanted this rainbow yarn to stand out. So I find that, using this simple stitch pattern really helped to highlight the yarn. And here we go. I have another project using multicolored yarn. This is a sweater I made a couple years ago. And I do have a pattern for this guy. And I actually used two different multicolored yarns for this one. It's brown and then like purple and brown. So some people might think that this is pretty ugly. I actually think it's fun. I really like it. It's a fun sweater to wear. And I really wanted the yarn to show up. So this pattern just uses half double crochet for the entire pattern. And that's a pretty simple basic stitch. So I wasn't concerned about the stitch, showing up, because I wanted this, crazy multicolored yarn to be the focus, to be the star of the show for this guy. So another thing to keep in mind is when choosing your yarn or a particular pattern, let's think about what you're making. So for this particular example that I have, so this is a shawl that I made, and this shawl, and I feel like shawls, a lot of shawls in general, not all shawls, but a lot of them, they do need to be blocked to really open up the stitches, especially if you're making lace. So if you're making a shawl that's a detailed lace shawl in acrylic yarn, that might not block out very well. So if you're not sure what blocking is, I do have a video that goes over blocking. Blocking, you know, really helps. It's like a finishing step when you're done knitting or crocheting to really help your project look its best. And so for this guy, I do have a pattern for this, and I highly recommend that you block it so that you can really get this nice drape and see the openness of the stitches. So this particular yarn that I used for this shawl is a linen yarn, and also I wanted this shawl to be more of a lightweight summer shawl, so that's another thing to think about too. You know, if you're using like a heavy wool yarn and you're, you know, want to wear this with a sundress. Now, if you're wearing the sundress in wintertime, then that might be, you know, a really good choice. But I was thinking like, you know, those slightly cool summer nights and you just wanted to, you know, throw this over your shoulders, you know, just for a little bit of warmth. So this linen yarn was a really good choice for that. And also it's a natural fiber, so it's going to block really well. So most natural fibers block really, really well, like wool, linen, bamboo, cotton, you know. And you know, this guy literally blocked like a dream. It opened it up, and the nice thing when you're using the natural fibers with blocking is it holds its shape. So the reason why acrylic might not work as well is like you can certainly block with acrylic, but once it's dry it kind of shrinks back a little bit. It doesn't stay that beautiful open look unless you are going to kill the acrylic, which is using steam or, you know, hot iron. And you have to be careful of, you know, burning your project when you're doing that. So just something to keep in mind. You know, you certainly can use acrylic to make lace objects, absolutely. My mom makes shawls all the time and she uses acrylic yarn all the time and they look beautiful. But she does keep in mind of what stitch that she's doing when she's using that, and certain stitches do kind of hold their shape where they don't really need to be blocked, and she's really good at picking projects to go with that yarn so that her finished objects look beautiful. The last thing I wanted to share is don't be afraid of combining different yarns together, but just keep in mind that if you are combining a lot, like if you're going through your stash and you find a whole bunch of just little bits of, you know, worsted weight or fingering weight, you know, don't be afraid to combine them, but you want to make sure if you're combining yarns to keep it to a similar weight. So here is another project that I have to show you. So this is a shawl that I made, and this shawl is actually made with 4 different colored yarns. I'd gone to a local yarn store and I bought a bag of like basically scraps, and the colors were super pretty, and when I saw it, I just, in my mind, I'm like, I want to make a shawl out of this because they were all similar weight yarn and I love anything purple. And so I just thought a shawl would be super beautiful, and I think this is super beautiful. I used, like I said, 4 different colors, and the yarn was similar weights and also similar fibers. It was all like a merino wool, which is a wonderful yarn to block with because this is very lacy, as you can see, and you really want the lace to pop, so I obviously did block this guy. So yeah, if you're making, let's say, a blanket and you see these colors and you love them, but your yarn is worsted weight and fingering weight, well, they're pretty different in weights. If it's a little bit different, like let's say for instance, if anybody knows about Caron Simply Soft yarn, that typically is labeled as a number 4 worsted weight yarn, but to me it's kind of closer to a decate weight yarn or a number 3. So if you have some decate weight yarn and you have Caron Simply Soft and you want to make a blanket out of it, I'd say go for it. I think it would be fine because they're close enough in weight. But if you have, let's say, a number 5 yarn and a fingering weight yarn, I mean, that is a really big difference, and your gauge is going to be all over the place. You know, you're going to have really, you know, big stitches on really little stitches, and then your rows on the edges are going to be all over the place, and then you're going to be like, well, why isn't this square or rectangular? And that would be the reason why. So just you know, keep that in mind when you are making like a scrap project. I love scrap projects, but you do want to, if you want your project to really look its best, I do suggest using a yarn that is similar in weight. But again, these are all tips, suggestions. I mean, you can do whatever you want. If you want to make that cable project in the craziest multicolored yarn, go for it. There is no knitting or crochet police. I'm just, you know, putting this video out here as a suggestion in case some of you were struggling with your projects and were wondering, you know, why doesn't it look, you know, why am I not happy with this? And that could be a reason. It could just definitely come down to yarn choice. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. If you did not, then just scroll on by, and I will see you next time. Bye! Hi, it's a couple days later, Sonia, so I was getting ready to edit this video, and I was looking at the footage, and I saw that there were some things that I missed that I wanted to share. So going along with your yarn choice, depending on who you are making the pattern for, so that's very important, or what the item is, can affect your yarn choice and help you to make sure that your project is as best as it can be. So for instance, let's say you're making a baby blanket. I do not suggest using, you know, wool yarn, something that could be a potential allergy, something that's super expensive, because let's face it, babies are messy. They spit up, you know, their diapers leak. And also, if it's for a new mom, you don't want to have to burden her with special care instructions by saying, oh, you have to hand wash this blanket. You know, new moms don't have time for that. So just keep that in mind, you know, something that's easy care. It doesn't have to be the cheapest of cheap yarn by any means, but something that, you know, mom can throw in the wash, put in the dryer, or just hang it up to dry, and it's good to go. And the same could apply for anybody that you're making something for. So keep in mind the recipient. Let's say you're making a gift. Make sure they don't have any allergies. Make sure they're knit and crochet worthy. I have made projects for people, and the worst that I had was I made something for someone for their baby, and then like 2 years later, we did a yard sale together, and the blanket that I made her was in that yard sale, which, okay, that's fine. But really? Sorry, my battery died, but we were talking about the yard sale incident. So yes, I had made a blanket for somebody, and here's a picture of the blanket. I think it turned out really pretty. And in case you're thinking, oh, maybe she's not religious or anything, well, this person was heavily involved in ministry, so that had nothing to do with it. And I just thought it was kind of in poor taste. I'm sure she didn't realize, maybe she forgot that I had made it for her, I don't know. And again, it's fine if you're not into that kind of stuff, but it is a little disheartening when you've worked really hard on something and the person, you know, just so carelessly disregards your feelings and, you know, sells it at a yard sale that you're participating in. But I came to learn that, you know, she really didn't like handmade things. It wasn't her thing, because there were other handmade items that she was selling that had been given to her for her baby, and they were beautiful. You know, it wasn't just my blanket. There were other things, and it was, I mean, I was like, why are you selling these things? These are absolutely gorgeous. But, you know, she preferred things bought from a store, so I learned, you know, hey, if I'm going to get her a gift again, it's just going to be from Walmart or something, you know, that it's going to have that brand new tag. But the silver lining with that story is when we had that yard sale and I saw those items for sale, it was a little like, but we still remain friends. I didn't say anything. I think she would have been really embarrassed. I think she just forgot, which, because it had been like 2 years later since I had made it for her. But those, my blanket and another blanket in particular that she had made, absolutely beautiful work, were the first things to sell. Some woman came and snatched them up immediately and bought them. So that made me happy. I thought, well, you know what? It wasn't really meant for her. It was meant for this other person who could really appreciate, you know, something that was made with care and love. So, you know, just keep those things in mind. You know, not everybody appreciates crochet or knit items. They just don't. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are if they find out that they were handmade and not by some fancy designer. They're like, they don't want it. It's no good to them. So, you know, just keep in mind of who you're making it for. I mean, you can't control what other people do. And, you know, I just grew up in a family. My mom is super crafty. Like, she can sew, she quilts, she can paint, she can crochet. She made my wedding dress, she made my prom gown, and they were not handmade looking. Like, my mom's got some skills, and my grandmother knit. My other grandmother also did like embroidery. So I grew up in a family where I was surrounded by handmade things. My sister cross stitches, my other sister knits. You know, I have nieces and nephews that like to paint and draw. And so I'm surrounded by all that stuff. So handmade items, like we didn't grow up with a lot of money, so we would make gifts for each other and we treasured those things. So those things are really important to me. I love a handmade gift. If I know that someone slaved over it, well, maybe not slaved, but, you know, worked hard on it, and, you know, it just warms my heart. I really appreciate that. So, like, I still have this bracelet that my nephew made me, and he's 17 now, but he would have been maybe 6 years old, maybe, yeah, about 6 years old, and he made me this purple beaded bracelet, sparkly, you know, stretchy bracelet, and I still wear it to this day. Purple's my favorite color. Yeah, it's a little, some people might think it's a little tacky, but he made it for me, and he made it with me in mind, knowing that my favorite color is purple, and I love bracelets too. I'm a big bracelet gal. I love a bracelet. So I just thought that was so precious and so sweet, and so I actually still wear that bracelet to this day. It's about 12 years later. I still have it. I still treasure it, and you know, that's just me, but that's not everyone. It doesn't make that person a bad person. It doesn't make that particular person that I told that story a bad person. But, you know, you don't want to work really hard on something and then the person just, you know, would rather have something from Walmart. So just keep that in mind. You know, keep in mind someone that might have allergies. They might love a handmade item, but they just, you know, they have an allergy. They can't tolerate wool, or they don't like acrylic on their skin. So, you know, maybe make them something in cotton, something like that. Or if you're making a blanket for a younger child, and they're going to love it, but it's going to get a lot of wear and tear. So use a yarn that's going to be like a workhorse yarn that can take a beating. You know, don't bust out that, you know, super delicate fingering weight, cashmere, whatever, for something like that. So I just wanted to, you know, throw that in there, as I just thought of it as I was going to start to edit this video. So now I'm really going to end this video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for you. And again, these are all just tips and suggestions. And please like and subscribe if you liked this video. If you did not, then just scroll on by, and I will see you next time. Bye!